Donald Trump is furious at his son, and it has led Don Jr. to implode in such an excellent way for us to watch on his podcast because he is unraveling at the same time his dad is. And there's a couple of reasons why Donald Trump is very upset with his son. The first being, much like Don Jr. isn't really capable of complex thought. And so everything that he has said or posted or podcasted about recently has really just blown up in his dad's face. A great example of that, Don Jr. has tried to is key here, but tried to criticize Kamala Harris's economic record, only reminding us of the failure that was the Trump economy, the complete collapse during COVID with Donald Trump's failed leadership that led to it. And at the same time, we've also seen him try to go after Tim Walz, who gave his wife a hug at a rally, and that was some big calamity to Don Jr. And so he took to Twitter to criticize Tim Walz and his wife, which led us to just a reminder that Don and Melania are not on the best terms right now. So everything that Don is saying is blowing up in his dad's face. And again, like father, like son, everything that Donald Trump has been saying lately is blowing up in his face. But it's not just that. Donald Trump Jr. was also the biggest advocate, the biggest proponent of a certain guy by the name of J.D. Vance. Yes, J.D. Vance was so supported by Don Jr., and I'm surprised that Donald Trump actually listened to his kids, because I don't really think it seems like he likes them all that much, except for Ivanka. But Don Jr. was pushing his dad to select J.D. Vance, and of course that has turned into maybe not just the most devastating decision this Trump campaign has made, certainly one of them, but maybe one of the worst decisions in the history of presidential politics. Just an absolute disaster, a complete calamity. It has been bad. And so Don Jr. is in the doghouse. And because of that, you can just tell how nervous and anxious he is, how much he is unraveling in every podcast, getting worse and worse. And he thinks that the answer to this is he will solve the problem of the messaging issue against Kamala Harris. He'll be the one to land the best attack. And Don will say, I'll spare you the trouble. It's not going to happen. You're not going to solve anything. So please keep embarrassing yourself. We'll let you do it, but I want to check out some of these clips of Don Jr. completely humiliating himself and his dad on his podcast. And let's start with this one.
There's a trend here for those who are not paying attention. Free rioters and free criminal illegals.
So this is an argument that I see from MAGA a lot, trying to say that Kamala Harris, the career prosecutor, the district attorney of San Francisco, then the Attorney General of California, that person is soft on crime, someone who went after criminals and the corrupt like Donald Trump her entire career. They want to call her soft on crime. And they want to do the same thing to Tim Walz. They want to say that he is soft on rioters, soft on protesters. And it's funny because it just brings up what is very clear and true, that Donald Trump is a convicted felon. 34 counts, if I'm remembering correctly, Don. And wasn't it also your father who pledged that he would pardon the convicted January 6 rioters? So I think the person who is backing rioters and backing felons and criminals is your dad. So we really appreciate the reminder that Donald Trump has promised to pardon people who attacked our democracy. Not only is Donald Trump incredibly unpopular for January 6th, there are many Republicans who do in fact support him, who think pardoning the rioters is a bridge too far. So thank you, Don. Thank you for the reminder. We really appreciate you hurting your dad's own campaign. And it's so funny that they think these attacks will land, that MAGA thinks these are going to be the attacks to help them, call Kamala Harris soft on crime when their candidate is a criminal. It's criminally crazy is what it is. And so is this attack from Don Jr.
They understand that everything she said is asinine. They understand that the American public does not want any of that. That's why she doesn't have to have policies. And the policies she does come up with, she steals from my father, trying to pretend like that's real. Like she's not just going to change on day one, right? Whether it's no tax on tips, which she stole from my father.
If you didn't already know that Donald Trump is the most selfish man in America, a complete narcissist, something that could help you figure that out is this attack that he's trying to make on Kamala Harris for quote unquote stealing his no tax on tips policy, a policy that Kamala Harris actually has a vision for, trying to close loopholes in the tax system that the top 1% have used and abused to make themselves wealthier and avoid taxation. But we're going to talk about that in just a second. But it's such a clear example that Donald Trump doesn't actually care about any policy. If he thought this policy would actually help working Americans, he'd be thrilled that Kamala Harris is supporting it as well. When Joe Biden and Kamala Harris passed bipartisan legislation, they celebrated the Republican support for it because it just shows how common sense the policies that they enacted into law are. But Donald Trump only wants credit. He doesn't want to impact people's lives. He doesn't want to support the middle class. He just wants tax cuts for him and his rich friends. And so when he is not getting credit all the time, it's the only thing that he thinks about. It's the only thing that consumes him. And of course, I said that Donald Trump's approach to no tax on tips and Kamala Harris's were incredibly different. And Jessica Tarlov talks about that in this clip.
Well, the thing with the no tax on tips policy, which the Democratic senators have endorsed, and it has bipartisan popularity, but there is a distinction between the way the Democrats would do it and the way that Trump would do it. So the way the Kamala Harris plan would work is there would be an income limit, because right now there's a loophole in Trump's approach which would allow people like corporate lawyers, for instance, to take advantage of it, or people who work at hedge funds. So they want to make sure that it's actually for people who are earning low wages. And I should note that the Culinary Union came out and endorsed Kamala Harris. Donald Trump went on this whole thing like, I'm so good for the servers, and he did this in Las Vegas. They talked to a woman who said, you know, my tips are getting taxed, and the Culinary Union didn't care and endorsed Kamala, who they believe will be better for her.
But it was not her.
Now, of course, as I said at the beginning of this video, Don Jr. is a lot like his dad in the way that everything that they say blows up in their face. But also they are similar in the way that everything that they say is usually a lie. As Pete Buttigieg said, it seems like Donald Trump is competing in the Olympics of lying. That is his day-to-day competition on how many falsehoods he can spew in a single sentence. And Don Jr. is exactly the same. And that is what this podcast was. I don't even know if I can call it that, but that's what this podcast of Don Jr.'s, it's so bad. It was riddled with lies in every single way. But one of the funniest ones came right here.
My father, on the other hand, actually wants to save our economy and lower your taxes. He's done that once before. It's not just talk. He's actually done it. His talk aligns with his policies, unlike Kamala Harris, who are the opposite of all the policies that literally the administration she is currently serving under put into effect.
I don't remember when Donald Trump saved the economy. I pay attention to politics a good deal, Don, and I don't remember that. I remember when he inherited a booming economy from President Obama. The only thing that Donald Trump has ever had any success with in his life is inheriting things. And he got the booming economy from President Obama. But, yes, there was an economic crash that someone saved us from. Who was that? The crash was in 2020. And it was President Biden who saved us. Because Donald Trump's leadership and planning and execution, lack of execution really, was so poor during the COVID-19 pandemic that our economy collapsed. And who saved it? Who not only pulled us out of that collapse, pulled us out of that recession, and made our economy boom again? It was President Biden and Kamala Harris. We have the records, people. We can go back and look. We know who did what. We know who served how. This is incredibly clear. It's what's so great about this election is that we have the records. We have Kamala Harris's actual successes on the border. Wow, she was Attorney General of California. Wow, she was Vice President of the United States. We have Donald Trump's failed promises, and the things that he did promise that he succeeded on hurt our country, like his giant tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations. These things hurt. And so if they want to talk record, let's go for it. And that's why it's so funny that Don Jr. said this.
100%. And, you know, again, what's nice about this election is you actually had 4 years under the policies of both people on the ticket. Like, ask yourself, when were you better off?
Were we better off? Is that a joke? Do you remember COVID? Do you remember the failed leadership of Donald Trump? Not even COVID. Of course we remember that. Do you remember the division and chaos and anxiety that we all walked around with every day while Donald Trump was president, unsure of what tweet he was going to send off next to piss off a world leader or hurt our country, what policy he was going to put forward? that could be more destructive, the daily threats to our democracy, I remember. I'm sure you do too. So yes, Ton, let's check. When were we better off? I think the answer is right now, with real adults with real leadership skills in our White House that I'd like to see for another 8 years with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. I remember what we were like 4 years ago. And as Kamala Harris would say, and put so perfectly, we're not going back. We're not going back. We're not going back. And if you don't want to go back either, if you want to continue to call out these messages and be part of this show that is doing so, make sure that you hit that subscribe button. You leave a like on this video as always. The support really goes a long way. It means the world to me. And as always, until next time, I'll see you soon.